So we are on the second to last, penultimate week of the Beatitudes. I think I'm going to be out of town next week, but Todd Murphy is going to be filling in for me, and he is going to wrap up this series. So if you weren't here last week, I think everybody has been here before, so we won't do that. Well, have you guys have not been here? Okay, cool. So we've been going through the entire Beatitudes of Matthew 5. And so we'll kind of do a recap of last week. But this week, we are covering the last two of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God or children of God. And then blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So last week, let me close this door. Last week, we covered, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And we said that mercy is a couple things. It's inherently connected to justice. So when you talk about justice, you end up talking about mercy. When you talk about mercy, you end up talking about justice. Those two things are interconnected. And we said that mercy is a compassionate withholding. Somebody at the door? Okay. A compassionate withholding of, or mitigating, or relieving of justly deserved consequences. And then a question came up, which was a great question. I think Sam brought up this question, was what is the difference between grace and mercy? And so we talked about a little bit about that. And grace and mercy are one of those things that are kind of also interconnected. Sometimes it gets a little messy to distinguish what you're looking at when you see grace and which one you're looking at when you see mercy. But kind of simplistically, we could say grace is unmerited or undeserved favor, kindness, blessings, gifts, that type of thing. When we think about Jesus on the cross, that is grace. But they are connected, right? Grace and mercy are connected. Grace reflects the positive generosity of God, and mercy reflects his restraint. So when we talked about last week, we talked about God in the Old Testament, and God would say, "Hey, you're doing bad things," and he'd send a prophet or somebody to tell somebody, "Hey, you're doing bad things." And God was, to be just, God could have at that moment reacted and said, "Hey, you're doing bad things, therefore here's the punishment." But God restrains his hand. God withholds his wrath. God, gives people time to try to get them to listen, that type of thing. And that's a kind of a pattern in the Old Testament. And that is mercy, right? That is God restraining or something like that. His wrath, his punishment, something along those lines. So I'm going to use an example from this week. If you've been on the internet, you know probably where I'm going. If you have not, well, this is going to be fun. But this has been all over the internet the entire week, and I'm talking about the Coldplay Kiss Cam event. Anybody missed that event on the internet this week? No? Okay. If you did, CEO of a company and his HR director, they were at a Coldplay concert together in a way that they probably shouldn't have. And Coldplay decided to do a kiss cam and zoomed in right on them, and they're there hugging at a concert, and they react as they should have with shame and all these things. And it's been viral on the internet all week. And if you've been on any type of social media, you have seen it, in your feed. And I'm not really that much on social media, and I've seen it a lot. So, it's one of those. It's hugely viral if I'm seeing it. But I was thinking about it. And one of the things that I read, the woman who posted the video, I think it went to TikTok first. I think she posted it to TikTok, and then it went crazy from there. When asked about the video, she said, a part of me feels bad for turning these people's lives upside down. And then she says, but play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And I was kind of thinking about that response, and I'm like, well, honestly, that's probably a just response, right? But what is a merciful response? A merciful response obviously is not to kind of ignore it or condone it, right? We don't want to say these are, these are things that should be allowed, or these are good things, or anything like that. But what is a merciful response? And my family knows this, and people who know me well know this. Mercy is not one of those things that, I have an easy time with. Mercy, I struggle with mercy. I look at things very, quickly, judge them. I'm like, hey, that's wrong, move on. Mercy is not a thing that's natural for me. But I was trying to think through, what is a merciful response? And as I was doing so, I remembered one of kind of my favorite literary quotes that has something to do with this. And if you know me, you're going to say it's Lord of the Rings. I'm like, yes, it's absolutely from Lord of the Rings. But that's from the not well-known appendices of The Return of the King. And in that section, there's a quotation, and it's describing Faramir, who's the son of Denethor. Denethor is the steward and ruler of Gondor. And then at the end, other stuff happens. I will not ruin the story if you've never read it or watched the movie. Read it, don't watch the movie. Books are better. But Denethor is portrayed as intelligent, well-educated, pragmatic, just, and sadly somewhat cruel. His older son, Boromir, who is also a big character in the books and the movie, portrayed similarly, less shrewd. He's a warrior and a man of action. And then Faramir is the younger son. And Faramir is described in this way. And here's the quote. I'll put it up. Faramir reads the heart of men as shrewdly as his father. But what he read moved him sooner to pity than to scorn. He was gentle in bearing and a lover of lore and music, and therefore by many of those days his courage was judged less than his brothers. But it was not so, except that he did not seek glory and danger without purpose. And the line there that is important is that what he read, he shrewdly read the heart of men, and what he read moved him sooner to pity than to scorn. And while scorn is probably a just response, and I saw a lot of that, on the internet, there were a lot of memes and that type of thing, making fun of these two people. Pity is probably the merciful response. Well, you might say, why pity them? Well, their actions have and will cause damage to themselves and to others because they suffer the same affliction that we all suffer. They're essentially brainwashed POWs fighting on the wrong side of a war against God, if you will, and against His moral law. They are in the same boat that we would be in without Christ. And it just as easily could have been us. And so thinking about this, I was thinking kind of pity's appropriate response. That's the type of response that would be the merciful response in this situation. Not making fun of them, not pointing out, well, there's a leadership lesson here, or there's a personal branding message, whatever you want to say. But as a Christian, the appropriate response is pity. And that got me to another Lord of the Rings quote. And then this is really long, so I won't put it up. But you've probably seen this if you've seen the movies. It's a discussion between Gandalf and Frodo, and they're talking about this character Gollum. Gollum's a bad guy. If you haven't seen the movies or read the books, not a good character, evil, if you will. And Frodo says to Gandalf, they're talking about Gollum, and he says, "What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had a chance." And Gandalf replies, "Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end because he began his ownership of the ring with pity." "I'm sorry," said Frodo, "but I'm frightened. I do not feel any pity for Gollum. Now, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc and just an enemy. He deserves death." And Gandalf finishes with this. Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there's a chance of it. And if he is bound up in the fate of the ring, my heart tells me that he has some part to play for good or ill before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not the least. Spoiler, if you haven't read the books or watched the movies, it does. Important line. But both grace and mercy are outpourings of benevolence and love. So, where does that come from? Well, it comes from what we talked about last week. Second greatest command, love your neighbor as yourself, all right? That's where it comes from, and loving God with everything that you are. So our second beatitude we covered last week was, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And we said that a pure heart is one that has a focus, desire, attention, more specifically love for one thing. And that love is not mixed, swayed, or conflated with other things. It is a heart more closely aligned with the righteousness of God, we might say, right? The righteousness and holiness of God, and thus more clearly apprehends the wills, the actions, and presence of God even on this side of eternity. So when we say they shall see God, that's what we're talking about, because our hearts are closely aligned with the holiness, the righteousness of God, the character of a God, and therefore we clearly see and apprehend the will, actions, and presence of God. And we see this a little bit in Jesus' high priestly prayer. And he says, I've given them, he's praying to God, right? I've given them your word. The world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I'm not of the world. Sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I've sent them. And what Jesus is saying in his prayer is that, this being pure of heart is being sanctified. It's being not of the things of this world. And if we can do that, if we strive for that, then that is what gives us the connectedness, the holiness, righteousness, the patterning ourselves after Christ to be able to see God. So that was our recap from last week. This week, Peacemakers. So I started off the series doing a lot of quotes from like Catholics and others, and so I've done John Calvin twice. So we're doing another week with Calvin. He says, by peacemaker, Jesus means those who not only seek peace and avoid quarrels as far as lies in their power, but whose labor to settle differences among them, who also labor to settle differences among them, among others, who advise all men to live at peace and take away every occasion of hatred and strife. There are good grounds for this statement. As it is laborious and irksome employment to reconcile those who are at variance. Persons of mild disposition who study and to promote peace are compelled to endure the indignity of hearing reproaches, complaints, and remonstrances on all sides. So, peacemakers are generally patient people, right? They're probably merciful people. I am not always a peacemaker. I try really hard. But peacemakers are those who can, who see through, hey, why are people complaining? Why are they having issues? Why are they being irksome and laborious? And can see that, hey, maybe there's something else going on there. They have an ability to see through what's going on, see through to the humanity, the problems. Some people are they're laborious and irksome. But some people are, reacting to the world that we live in. And some people come from bad backgrounds, and it is with mercy and pity that you often have to deal with those people. I often think of a term, and I thought of this term this weekend this week when I was kind of watching a lot of reactions to the Coldplay thing. That people use the term stupid a lot, and we often mean different things by stupid. We say that's stupid. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, one way to take that is that you are ignorant. Okay, that's one way to take it. Another way to take it is that you're foolish. You should know better, but you made a foolish mistake. You made a foolish decision. The situation that happened with the Coldplay thing, that was foolishness. And then another, it's just a cognitive issue, right? You don't have the cognitive capabilities to make the decisions that other people would make and what we would hope you would make. But most people, when they say stupid, they just assume the worst, right? And we don't take the time to break down. Hey, this guy is being irksome and burdensome, and it's stupid. Well, why is that person being irksome and burdensome, right? Why are they being laborious? Is it actually because they just don't understand what's going on? Is it because they're actually fools? Is it because they just are uneducated and they just don't understand? Or is it because they just don't have the cognitive abilities to do that? And that's going to change your approach for how you're dealing with people and how you're dealing with problems. So when we talk about peacemakers, that's the type of kind of mentality that that peacemakers will have. Aquinas says this: now the effect of the active life, remember we talked about the active and contemplative life last week and the week before, as regards those virtues and gifts whereby man is perfected in himself. So he's disposed more towards the contemplative life. Is the cleansing of man's heart so that it is not defiled by the passions. Henceforth, the sixth beatitude is blessed are the clean of heart, right? So the active life that he's talking about, and living a virtuous life through the gifting of the Holy Spirit, results in the cleansing of our hearts. But as regards the virtues and gifts whereby man is perfected, the relation to his neighbor, the effect of the active life is peace. According to Isaiah, the work of justice shall be peace. Hence, the seventh beatitude is blessed are the peace. And what he's saying is, hey, the stuff that we've talked about in the Beatitudes going forward, or from when we started at the beginning and moving forward, it has a kind of an effect where it impacts those later ones. You have to be merciful. You have to have a pure heart. You have to be meek, poor in spirit, those types of things. And as you develop those things, as you become that type of person and carry out those types of actions, you naturally become a peacemaker. You can't help yourself. It is one of those things that is a transformation of a person. Some people may start out more peacemakers than others. Some will have to work towards it. But some people will be, better at other parts of it, right? Some people may be better at the contemplative side. So we kind of all start in different places. We all have different strengths and different giftings, but it's kind of a journey that we're on towards that becoming a peacemaker. So, what is peace? Well, that's stupid, Zach. Everybody knows what peace is. All right. Anybody want to give me a peace definition? What is peace? Because this seems simple.
The opposite of war.
The opposite of war. Thank you, Thomas. Yes, it is the opposite of war, mostly. Anybody else? My children are like, don't call on me, don't call on me.
Maybe the absence of fear.
Good.
Serenity.
Serenity, ooh, yeah. Good. Josh, you started to say something. No? Okay, all right. No judgment here, judgment-free zone. This is like the Planet Fitness, judgment-free zone. So Aquinas is going to take a little bit of a different take on this, as he does. And he states, peace consists in a tranquility of order. Well, what does that mean? That's not very clear. And he's getting this from Augustine, who says something even less obvious. Order is the arrangement allotting the proper place to equals and unequals. What does that mean, Zach? Okay. They're basically talking about the order, a specific order of things, and specific relationship between those things. So we can say the first one is the subjection, of the human mind to God. So not subjugation, that's bad, that's by force. Subjection, right? You willingly subject your mind to being formed, right, to God and to His character. You're recognizing who and what God is, right? He is creator of the universe, all-powerful, He is all-knowing, all those things. Who and what God is. He's eternal. And then who are we? And what are we? We're creatures, right? We were made by the Creator. We are contingent. We could not. There's a world that maybe God didn't create us. That could have been the case, but God did create us. We're limited. God is unlimited, right? We don't know everything. God knows all. So it's an understanding of who we are and what we are in our relation to Him, right? We are less than He is, right? We owe everything that we have to Him. And when we take all those things, and then we have to understand how that should impact the way we think, the way we act, and the way we feel. You do that, and you have subjection of the human mind to God. It is a willing thing. It is an active thing. It's not just a, hey, I wake up one day and this is what it is type thing, right? So, 3 relations. Number 2, subjection of our base emotions and inclinations to human reason. And this comes, we talked about this in the first section when we talked about Aristotle and human reason and that type of thing. How are humans different than all other animals? Well, we have reason. That's what makes us different. And what is a good human? A human that is functioning as it should? It's one who reasons well.
I think you have the wrong.
Sorry. I get ahead of myself. I have notes. You guys can't see them. So subjection of our base emotions and inclinations to human reason. So not being controlled by extreme inclinations, right? Being virtuous is basically, understanding where that middle is, and you're not doing extremes, right? Courage is like one extreme is, being foolhardy, and the other extreme is cowardice. Somewhere in the middle is courage, and you get there through reason, right? You're controlling your base emotions, you're controlling your inclinations. Some of us are foolish and want to go fight battles, and some of us want to run away. Well, reason is what gets us kind of in the middle where the virtue is. So it's controlling those extreme inclinations, desires, emotions. Some of us have anger issues, right? There's righteous anger. That's okay. It's okay to be angry. That's an appropriate response to certain things. When you see the affliction of the innocent, you should be angry. You should not bottle that up. That is an appropriate response. But that is not an anger that should go out of control and then last forever. It should be controlled by reason. We talked about that early on. Think of Jesus in the temple when He was turning over tables and kicking people out of the temple. So those things must be controlled in the appropriate way in moderation under reason. And that's what distinguishes us. So that's, subjugation of the human mind. That's one relation that's ordered, right? You start there. Then you subjugation of our base emotions and inclinations. That's number 2 relation. And then the third one is the appropriate relations between people. All right? If you can get the first 2 in place, then you start working to what is the appropriate relationship between people. Being a peacemaker is part of that. Establishing appropriate relationships. Not being overbearing, being truthful, being kind. But not too kind, right? Because too much kindness is a bad thing. There needs to be a balance there. And what Aquinas and Augustine are getting at is, hey, peacemakers, they understand the balances of these 3 things. And then they know it starts with the first one. a right relationship with God, relating ourselves, our minds to God, and then we work down from there. You can't start working with people and trying to make peace amongst a bunch of people when you are not a godly person, because you're probably going to do it in the wrong way. You're going to go and go into ChatGPT, how do I make peace? And it's going to give you an answer and you're going to do it wrong. That type of thing. So you have to do it, you start at the top, and once you have those things in that order, then you have that tranquility of order that Aquinas is talking about. So we get those three in place. That is kind of the basis of becoming peacemakers. The challenge is, especially on this side of eternity, is we can probably subject our minds to God. We can probably start working towards appropriate relations with people, but that second piece, subjecting our base emotions, our inclinations, to reason, is going to be very difficult. Why? Well, we have a corrupted nature. Sin plays a part in this world, and it's not going away yet. Right? We have to live in this world, and we're going to be subjected to that, and it's going to be a constant fight. So that second one is going to be a really hard thing, and it's going to be a continuous struggle. But there's hope, for eternity. So this is one of those promises that's inchoate, right? Once again, yes, it starts here. It will not be fulfilled here. It will be fulfilled on the other side of eternity. But it does start here. Proverbs 16:7 says, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies be at peace with them. Right? We've seen, those people. You've seen those people who are peacemakers. They're not perfect peacemakers. But even on this side of eternity, there are peacemakers. And it's not it's not a thing that cannot be imagined. So the promise, right? The reward is what? They shall be called children of God. Well, the question is, who's going to call them that? Any guesses? God. Good job, Kevin. I was hoping you were going to say Jesus, but more specifically, God. Yes, God calls us children, right? Calls us His children. Who else? Well, yes. God the Father, God the Spirit, and the Son all call us children of God. One of the points that I really hadn't thought of, because this is I just usually don't think about this thing, but Aquinas makes this point. He says the angels, right? God's messengers, God's servants, those who are different from us, they'll even recognize us as God's children. And then eventually everyone. There are people who will see us in this life. When Jesus says they will know them by how they love each other, right? They will see that we are different. Hopefully that's a common thing. It's probably not, because we are sinful, and we struggle with being in this world and in our own nature. But people will see us as different. Whether they actually realize this day, that that's because of who we are, it will depend on what they know about us, right? So as you're talking about people, you're sharing Christ with people, they're like, oh, okay, maybe that is true. But one day, eventually, we'll all stand before the throne, right? And everyone will recognize where we stand. So eventually, it'll be everyone. But most importantly, God. Why? Well, first point, we're adopted into His family. That's the good news of the gospel, right? That's what the sacrifice and the substitution got us. Nothing that we did. That's what grace got us. Grace and mercy, right? We were adopted into His family, into the family of God. So, this is a very kind of Jewish first century thing, the term, the adoption, but it meant there's no recognition that that person's not part of the family anymore. They are an inheritor of the family. But not just that, right? Not just that. It's also because we're following in the footsteps of the only begotten Son. If we are following in the footsteps of the only begotten Son, we're following, trying to take on his characters, do the things that he said to do, we start to look like him. We start to look like the begotten Son. And it's natural that if we look like him, my children, people will say, oh, they're brothers. My sister and I, they used to think we were twins, right? Why? We looked alike. Nobody mistook us for not siblings. One time my brother-in-law and I were mistaken for siblings, and that was weird because we don't look anything alike, but if you start to look like someone, you start to act like them. If you call my house and someone picks up the telephone, yes, we still have a telephone that you can call at my house, not just cell phones. And either of those two answer the phone, you might not know that it's not me answering the phone. How do I know this? Well, my wife constantly hears someone talking and thinks it's me, and it's not me. So you start to look like someone, you start to sound like someone that you are becoming like. And it's easy to say, hey, that is so-and-so's child. That is a child of God. And then finally, we serve as instruments to establish the peace between God and man. That is part of our job here, right? Yes, it's go ye therefore make disciples, right? But why? Well, because God desires peace. He doesn't want to be at war with his creation. We started that, but he doesn't want that, right? So we serve as instruments of peace. When we are out discipling, when we are evangelizing, when we are baptizing, we are serving as instruments of peace because the gospel changes lives, right? If you've not seen changed lives, just talk to your brothers and sisters in Christ. I am not who I would have been. There are many of us who are not who we would have been if not for Christ. So we serve as instruments of peace between God. So where do we start? Well, a big line is this tranquility of peace, the tranquility of order. And that starts with becoming Christ-like, right? Subjecting our minds. When we establish peace with ourselves, and we establish order within our souls, right? So the tranquility is one of these things where, yes, you're establishing a relationship with your mind and God, subjecting your mind to God, but it's ordering yourself internally too, right? That's kind of what virtues are about. It's like being fixed on the inside through sanctification, right? You're not really fixing yourself, but you're involved in the process, right? You're not fighting against God. You're willingly struggling to be Christ-like. Right? So you're trying to order your soul. And that's what does that require? That's understanding the truth of our faith. That's growing in wisdom, right? Spiritual disciplines. Guys, spiritual disciplines matter. Do not start those when you're in your 30s or 40s. If you've never started them, do start those in your 30s and 40s or later. But if you can start early, like young people in the group talking to you, start those early because it's really hard later on. Just on a human level, cognitively, it's harder to develop habits as you get older. Trust me, I'm trying to develop better habits, and it's really hard. So start it when you're young, but spiritual disciplines are kind of part of that process. And then it proceeds by becoming a peacemaker to others through bearing the burdens of others. So one of the things that kind of comes out of becoming a peacemaker is you start doing things for others. Why? Because you love them. You're merciful, right? You have a pure heart that's aligned with God. You start to see the world in a different way. And so you start aiming to share the burdens of others. Okay. I will stop there. Does anybody need coffee? Coffee's ready. If not, before I move on to the next one, we'll do questions. So we don't have to come back. Thomas.
Mine is slightly technically argumentative.
Bring it.
You said that too much kindness is a bad thing.
Yes. Can be. Not is. Can be.
And so the technical part of that is kindness is a character of God.
Yeah.
Love is patient, love is kind. And he's likely infinitely that.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you say that too much of kindness is a bad thing at the same time saying that God is infinite kindness?
Okay. So infinite doesn't mean that he gives it to us all at once, right? Infinite is he has an overabundance. His kindness will never cease to be, right? Too much kindness is I'm giving you all the kindness all at once. That's kind of what I'm talking about. So an extreme of kindness. So I'm always kind. There are instances, you guys are parents, you know this. There are instances where you have to be a little tough and not kind, right? Too much kindness is you always use kind language. There's a way to not be helpful to raising kids if you always do kind language. Sometimes, okay, this depends on the kid, obviously. Some children hear correction and they're like, oh, I understand, and they don't need a strong word. Some children, Zach Milstead when he was a child, need very strong language because we think we know everything and we don't need interruptions from the outside world. And it really takes strong language to get our attention, right? It's not soft, it's not kind. It's also not cruel and brutal, right? So this is one of those things where I'm saying too much kindness, but I'm saying the extreme of kindness, right? The going too far. Kindness is somewhere in the middle, right? There's cruelty on one end and something else on the other end, and kindness is probably somewhere in the middle. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Yes?
So it's like a misapplication of kindness? Or like not the correct order of kindness?
It could be misapplication, it could be, or it could be misunderstanding what is needed, right, at that time. Sometimes surgery is the right thing in a medical sense. Surgery is not fun. Surgery is not, we could argue it's not a kind thing. You're cutting somebody open, right, and then stitching them back up. So maybe that's, but sometimes you can get around that by doing something a little less invasive. It's kind of that, right? You're balancing, you're making the decision at the right time. What is the most appropriate response? Sometimes saying hard things to people might be more kind than just giving them eternal kindness, right? The gospel is not always a pleasant message, when you tell somebody, hey, you screwed up, you're a sinner, what happens to sinners? Well, it's not a pretty picture. It's not usually taken well, or it can not be taken well, right? It can be a tough message, but it is an appropriate and a kind thing to tell them, hey, this is the reality of the existence we're in, right?
Discipline could be a kindness because it saves you from future pain.
Right.
What's the definition of kind?
Did not prep that one.
Because it feels subjective, depending.
I think it is depends on it is somewhat subjective depending on the situation, right? Because you might let a child make a mistake, especially when they're little, right? You might let a child fall down to learn how to ride their bicycle, right? Is that kind? Well, they got hurt, but they learned an important lesson, and then they learned to ride their bike. Okay, so that does seem like it's kind. So it really kind of it's more of a perspective type thing. So kindness would be doing a good to someone, though it might not be the good that they want. That's kind of how I would phrase it. Because what the good that we want is, well, we want to be comfortable, we want all our needs provided for, we want to drive a nice car and one that doesn't break down all the time, whatever. But maybe that's not what we need, because we need to grow in other areas. And therefore God might say, hey, I'm going to put you through some tough times so you can learn the lessons that you need to learn. And that would be kind, even though it's not necessarily fun, right? So that's the kind of definition I would go with. Cool? All right. Other questions? If not, moving on. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. The 8th Beatitude is a confirmation and declaration of all those that precede. Because from the very fact that a man is confirmed in poverty and spirit, meekness, and the rest, it follows that no persecution will induce him to renounce them. Hence, the 8th Beatitude corresponds in a way that all the preceding 7. So, what Aquinas is saying is, if you've developed all the things, the active virtues that we were talking about in the preceding Beatitudes, excuse me, you develop the characteristics that you need to be able to be persecuted, right? And to be able to react in the right way. Here's a point that I really want to make, and this needs to be clear. Persecution does not equal righteousness. That is not the case. Okay, why did I say that? Because I've heard too many times, in our culture especially, people say something like this: I'm being persecuted, so I must be doing something right. Right? That's not it. Just to be clear, that is not it. Why? Well, you could be persecuted for a lot of different reasons. Maybe you're actually doing something wrong. Or maybe you're just being a fool, right? And you're doing something foolish, right? That could be the case. Maybe it's not actual persecution. Thank you so much. Maybe it's, that was very kind, yes. Maybe it's God actually trying to gently correct you because you're being a fool. So I've seen people who have been persecuted, right, in their righteousness, in pursuit of righteousness, sorry. So they've been persecuted in pursuit of righteousness. But the persecution arose not because of their righteousness, but because how they were pursuing it. So if you were pursuing righteousness in a way where you're like haughty and you're rude and you're, in somebody's face and you're argumentative, okay, those don't sound like the people we've been talking about the last few weeks who behave in a beatitudinal kind of virtuous way. Remember where we began. What's the first? What's the first beatitude? Blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those who mourn and hunger and thirst for righteousness. Can you pursue righteousness in anything other than a Christ-like manner if you're doing those sorts of things? No, not really. You're going to pursue righteousness in a specific way. And if you're doing that in that way and you're being persecuted, okay, then that's the type of scenario, that's the type of thing we're talking about. But don't succumb to the temptation where I'm being persecuted. Well, is it because you're actually doing something that's righteous? Or is it something else? Calvin says, talking about being persecuted for righteousness' sake, this is descriptive of those who inflame the hatred and provoke the rage of wicked men against them. Through an earnest desire to do what is good and right, and they oppose bad causes and defend good ones, as far as lies in their power. This admonition has a general reference to all the godly. But if at any time the Lord spares our weakness and does not permit the ungodly to torment us as they would desire, yet during that season of repose and leisure it is proper for us to meditate on this doctrine, that we may be ready for whenever it shall be necessary to enter the field and may not gauge in the contest till we have been well prepared. Okay, what's Calvin saying? Really, what this beatitude is kind of initially targeted towards, or who it's specifically targeted at, is martyrs. Because Jesus knew that was coming, right? Historically, that came very close after this, right? And he knew he needed to prepare his disciples for that. And there have been times throughout history, all throughout the world, where that has been the case. If you know any of the stories about brothers and sisters in India, and in Africa, in the Middle East, in China, they still get persecuted for righteousness' sake. We happen to be in one of those situations where that's usually not the type of thing that we're dealing with for righteousness' sake, fortunately. And what John Calvin is saying, hey, if you're in that type of position, this beatitude is for you. It's also for you to meditate on and prepare for the day when it comes that you are in that position, right? So I work in IT. That's my day job. There's not a lot of persecution going on in IT usually. We're fighting cyber criminals, but not a lot of persecution going on. But I also do this type of stuff. I do it in other countries. I do it at seminaries. I do it in colleges. And there are cases where people may it may become a thing. I know academics and kind of my social circle who have been persecuted for things they have said. And the things that they've said were righteous, right? But it doesn't happen as much as in other parts of the world. But the message is, hey, this is for the martyrs. There's a chance you could be there one day. If you're not there yet, you should be meditating on this and preparing. And then the reward is the same as the first beatitude. So the very first one, we started with the kingdom of heaven as the reward, right? And we've come full circle. Those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, their reward is the kingdom of heaven. So if you are poor in spirit, that's where we start. That's where we end, right? So that's kind of the why we get this, hey, this is a cumulative effect. These are all tied together. You're not going to get them all at once, but the cumulative effect is the same thing as at the beginning. So, as opposed to the first one, the poor in spirit, remember we said that one is kind of inchoate. It started, but it's not there. It's unfulfilled. It's begun, but not quite, right? It'll be fulfilled perfectly in eternity. This one is much more focused on kind of an eternal reward. But like the humble, those who are persecuted shall be exalted and receive the highest excellence. Like the poor, they shall have abundance of riches. Okay. Going to wrap up. Questions?
Do you think persecution happens a lot to students? If you were to stand up and make an argument in your philosophy class, for example, and then everybody is like, "We hate you. What are you talking about?"
Depends on where you are.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate to study at two universities that had a very balanced faculty, and those who were not Christians were fairly friendly, and they were pretty open-minded and understood, hey, this is a complex world and we all end up at different spots. So I did not experience that very strongly. Sometimes like kind of little undercurrents of that, you kind of feel it, but it wasn't one of those like, in the classroom people were raging at me or anything like that. That is not to say that doesn't happen though. It really does depend on the context. So in some contexts, yes, that does happen. I think you see it in more subtle ways in our country. It's more of you teach your children, kind of godly characteristics that they're trying to pursue, right? A godly view of marriage, sexuality, that type of thing. And there is an undercurrent where kids are made fun of if they hold to those views, and starting as early as elementary school. One of my former jobs, I did technology in school districts, and I got to see way more than I wanted to in K through 12 districts all over the Southeast, and I got to see a lot of that. And so I think the persecution is not like what we see in India or in the Middle East or Africa, right? It's not that kids are getting beat up physically, but it's more kind of an emotional thing, it's kind of a bullying thing, being made fun of, which is tough at that age. We all know that. So I think in our country, the persecution is not necessarily as in your face, but is definitely there to a degree. Are we gonna lose lives over it? Not most of the time, but it does make sense to, I kind of started in the apologetics world and did a lot of that, done a lot of work there. And it does make sense to kind of do some basic training on like doctrine and, kind of arguments to have a response to those types of things, because those things do happen, they do come up, especially if you're in a secular school. And even then, you may find that in some Christian schools, right? Just because they go to a Christian school, Christian university, doesn't mean jack these days. You may or may not find it. My first experience of that type of thing was at work as a 20-year-old, I think. Kind of had, and it wasn't like a harsh thing. It was just like funny, blah, blah, Zach believes this, and he's the only one in the group that believes that. And they just like every once in a while harp on it. That's kind of tough to deal with. And if you don't know how to, if you're not prepared, those things, require some training or some, guidance to respond. And so I think the persecution that we see in this country is mostly in that way. On a large scale, there may be different stuff, and I try to focus more on the interpersonal stuff that I can see more often, and I think it's more subtle than that most of the time. Other comments, questions? Okay. So, what does this look like in practice? What does it look like to be a peacemaker and to be one who's persecuted for righteousness' sake? It's an intentional seeking after the correct order between God and humanity and amongst human beings. That's what it is to be a peacemaker. I should have included reason in there, but I kind of subsumed that into the first one. And then it is a cumulative effect of the other Beatitudes, that it's what it's like to be one who is persecuted for righteousness' sake, leading to a preparedness to suffer as Christ suffered. He doesn't ask us to do any more than he's already done. He's already been through it. We're just becoming like him, right? We look like him, we act like him. People are starting to recognize us as a child of God. How was the begotten Son of God treated? We shouldn't expect too much difference. So that is it for today. Let me wrap us up in prayer, and then we will be done. Heavenly Father, we praise you for giving us a message that has lasted thousands of years and still has meaning for us today. A few simple verses that have baffled the minds of men and continue us to call on you for clarity and understanding, to be able to apprehend your plan for our lives and how this impacts us and how we should embrace it and follow it and use it and employ it, Father. Give us the strength to start at the beginning, to pursue the godly life in a beatitudinal way, that we might be balanced in the things that we do and the way that we think and how we feel in an appropriate way, in a Christ-like way, and that is reflected in our actions and how we treat others and how we live our lives, Father. We ask that you would go with us now as we go to the service, prepare our hearts to hear the message for today, to sing your worship and to join in communion. In Christ's holy name, amen.